o kau ki ana ele o e mau e komo ako e mamo ako e
Melina manoa I ka lehua aloha, aloha ua tuahine. Mailua hine ahiwa I ki, kia I ke kahau kani. Kaninona leo, e o kamaaina, aina aloha e, manoa e.
From the older generations, saying that the younger generation has to step it up and carry the torch and move forward. But I'm not sure that we all know much at all about that torch, except that it's hot, really hot. And we've been taught since the day we could reach for things, we've been taught don't touch anything that's hot, danger. So we believe that a bit more political dialogue between generations helps to demystify the torch, and without cooling the torch, and while not promising a future without burns, these discussions, as raising consciousness, are meant to embolden us to not fear the fire. So getting to the discussion, I have to acknowledge that this interaction with the Harawiras is only possible because of strong relationships that have been built over the years between people from our Hawaiian sovereignty movement and those in the Maori struggle. So ongoing solidarity building is critical to movement building. One of those people is student, practitioner, partner, and father, Andre Perez, who's also a student here in Hawaiian Studies, who felt it would have been a great missed opportunity if something was not coordinated between students and these two inspirational leaders. So mahalo nui to Andre for making this possible, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce our revered guests.
Okay, keep it short. Yeah, aloha mai kako. You know, I'm only fortunate to stand upon the shoulders of strong people who came before me and who took me, embraced me and took me under their wing. And I really acknowledge people like Korekoa Ka'eo and Skippy Ioane and Papi Kamehere, Kekuni Blaisdell and Terry Keko'olani and lots of others, Oko Maka, etc. It's only through these makua minds who we have exposure and connections to people like Hone and Hilda. I first met Hone and Hilda really at Sovereignty Sunday some years ago, and at Kekuni's house one evening having a discussion. But my inspiration with Hone and Hilda Harawira goes maybe a little bit further back. In 2004, we were fortunate to be able to organize a core group of Hawaiian men on a cultural exchange to Aotearoa. And just so happened when we were there was a hikoi. And we met them in a place called Otaki, was it?
Yeah.
Otaki. We, under the leadership of our Po'o Kyle Nakanilua, Kamana'o Pono Crab, Sam Ka'ai, we took a core group of 40 kane to Aotearoa, and we happened to be in Wellington. And I remember sleeping in a couple different marae, and like 2 o'clock in the morning, there's just people trickling in with blankets and pillows, and I didn't really understand what was going on. Well, I figured out there's some kind of protest march going on, and we were there. You know, we had a itinerary, but we wanted to go and be a part of this. So we all pitched in, you know, dollar, got rented a bus to take us out to where we could meet them. And we got there a little bit early, so we met the hikoi head on. And it was probably the most amazing, frightening, uncomfortable thing, you know. but through our protocol exchange, we immediately were welcomed and able to join the hikoi. And I remember seeing Hone leading the hikoi, and you know, we walked for a half a day, and it was inspirational. I came home and told my friend Kalekoa about it. I said, hey, I'm watching the hikoi, and he said, yeah, really? Wow, what are you doing here? And I said, wow, what am I doing? You know, because I wasn't doing much. So these kinds of experiences have really helped to politicize me. And since then, I've been striving to be as active as possible in following in his footsteps and learning from the wisdom and experiences of our Makua. I was excited when I got a message from Hone that he was going to be here, and Hone asked me, you know, I want to connect with the movement, you know, anything you can plug us into, you know, let us know, you know. So my first thought was here at the university. So where our Opio and our up-and-coming Makua are, like Ilima said, I felt that I wasn't interested in having some kind of big panel and featuring Hone behind a microphone. What I wanted was really to to talk and engage in a meaningful way, in a way that's comfortable for everyone, but really be able to learn from him and Hilda about movement, and building, and creating traction and critical mass, and how do we, and not only that, but how do we keep it going? You know? How do we keep on? Because sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's slow. So I approached Ilima, because I know that she's a strong student organizer here. I said, hey, what do you think about this? Let's do it. And so we did it. You know, and it's you know, simple, but I think it's going to be meaningful. So with that, I mean, I'm very honored to introduce Hone Harawira, his wife Hilda Harawira, and grateful for the time they're making to come and kuka with us and engage and share ideas and wisdom and knowledge. Mahalo nui loa, Hone, Hilda. I think we just want to kind of start off our dialogue. We wanted to kind of just dive right into it, talking about organizing and leadership and how to, some of the key things I think that we struggle with is we've got lots of leaders. You know, our joke is we got lots in kings, as Skippy calls them, kings, queens, and various accessories in Hawaii. But there's a difference between leaders and leadership. And what's your thoughts on, you know, maintaining, getting the people to move and come together? How do you do that? What's the good, the bad, the ugly?
Aki mai no rā tātou, koe no hei timatangi ai tā tātou kōrero me mihi atu ki ngā tū o te ao Maori, o te ao o ngā i take koutou anō rā e te haukanga mihi atu ki a koutou. Tātou anō o koutou nei teina, o tāi mai, o hoki mai nei ki te kāinga ki a noho tai, ki a kōrero tai. Ki rapuhi ai te tai huarahi, ki a tai atu mātou ki te tū motu ake, o tātou katoa roto o te mananui atiwa. Reire tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. I'm actually going to turn over to Hilda, because she's the real activist in the family. The whole thing about men being leaders is often true, but for those of you who have been involved in any form of movement politics will know, if the woman is strong, it's easy for the men to be strong. It's as simple as that. So my leadership is very much founded on a lot of the strength that I've drawn from Hilda, and she's been involved in this sort of thing actually longer than I have. So, tēnā koutou, good to see some of you, good to see some of those older ones last night, like Skippy and Maka, and a couple of others that we've managed to catch up with since we've been here. Kikuni, he's not too well, and Soli, of course, he's in hospital. But yeah, I think if there's anything that I'm looking for is to see new blood, new spark, new fire, and as you said, new action. We'll get to the mana thing a little bit later, but I'll turn it over to you. Kia ora tātou.
Can we just make a quick note on the format? just wanted to make a quick note on the format. Sorry to interrupt, but Hilda, Andre kind of started off the discussion, but this is interactive, so if at any point you want to kind of raise your hand and be like, oh, well, she just said that, what about this? You know, feel free to jump in and stuff like that. And once that discussion kind of fizzles out, someone can ask a new question, and if not, we have some other questions prepared. So sorry to interrupt.
That's cool.
Kia ora tātou. Nānei. Great to see lots of young people. Ngā mihi ki te whanaunga no Pokepoto. It's lovely to see that exchange between Maori and Kanaka, Maori. Ka mihi atu ki taku hoa lei anuinui. Koia me Queen Kim me te kōtiroa Kalama. The men are famous, but actually the women are the glue that keep the little dots connected sometimes. Anyhow, I came here in 1980 to a Nuclear Free Pacific conference. It was some church thing back in Aotearoa, and we had been activists for the Treaty of Waitangi, which is a bit like your Mahele, I think. And I came here all gung-ho, you know, we were going to share the story about the treaty, and that was the most oppressive thing in the whole wide world. And we came here, and I tell you, I was utterly blown away by the international speakers that came, because they're mainly a lot of Indigenous people. And being young and green, I think I may have only been, you know, in my early 20s. A young daughter, my second child, and I think the impact was really out there. So there are people talking about the demilitarization of the Pacific, something totally new for a lot of us. Really about the, you know, the way that Indigenous rights have been impacted on, and you know, so for a lot of the we call it iwi taki Indigenous people of the Pacific. For us, our issues was about the, you know, people trampling on our culture, the oppression of people taking our land and our language and our culture. And then the demilitarization thing was just like another bit added towards that, rather than something separate. And then we realised that the reason that Pākehā were involved, how they were involved, was because the nuclear bomb threatened their health. If it hadn't have been for the nuclear issue, maybe they wouldn't have been involved in that hui. So it was a sort of a very powerful impact here in Hawaii, and I think I learned two things from there. That my little old struggle on the Treaty of Waitangi was similar to other Indigenous peoples right throughout. So when they dropped the bomb in Murirua and Whangatofa, and how it impacted on the Tahitians who also had been fighting for independence. You know, what had happened in other parts of the Pacific that had been militarized by major superpowers, how that had impacted on their culture. So as Indigenous people, we just saw the connections immediately. For others, really famous, or even inside my own country, Greenpeace, they didn't see that as important. They saw the health issue as the major. So there was a lot of tension, as would be. And from within that, you know, we started saying that, you know, maybe Indigenous people need to, there's all kinds of things that come out of it, but it had a major impact on my life. And so from there, you know, we've kept up those contacts right throughout the Pacific. Those contacts made from that thing still exist today within the liberation movements. They are what we call liberation movements. They're not people who talk, they're people that act. Anybody can talk and anybody can sound intelligent, but it's actually about people who move communities and act. So those networks still live on today, and we tautoko support each other still today. The other interesting thing I learned that from there was from the organising committee, and especially Betty Johnson. Some of you may not, you're too young to even know who she was, but two key people came from there. It was Betty Johnson and her son Giff. Betty Johnson I admired from afar about how you organise from behind. I saw how she looked after all of the volunteers, how, you know, her and a whole big organising committee. There were Indigenous people in there, but I watched her and thought, I want to be like that. There's another woman like that in Aotearoa that I admired, Liz Marsden. She was similar. They organised from behind. And the other one, the main person from there was Solly, who was actually the cook. And if he hadn't have taken us, because we would have just gone back to our little bunks or whatever, if he hadn't have taken us and said, look, I want to take you to some other place and, you know, show you some different, and, you know, we wouldn't have known there was something outside the conference. But we also met people that were from the, you know, fighting issues here in Hawaii who had leprosy. So these people had a huge impact on myself as a young person in those contexts still today. And I like to think that they have heightened things. So I think for me in Aotearoa, the two key issues have always been about the treaty, Te Treaty o Waitangi. We had just launched a book while we were here, and it was, it's called Ngāpuhi Speaks, and it's from oral kōrero that have been hidden inside archives for a long time. And it was a collaboration between Maori activists and treaty network activists, Pākehā activists. And it was about getting the stories that were told by our people, not how historians have repeated and recounted our things. So the other issue for us is we must tell our own stories. It's funny how outsiders think they have your story and then they'll either put a slant on it, that you needed to lose, that you lost, you're a loser, or whatever, or you deserve to be here because we're far more, the other people are more intelligent than you and you deserve to be on the bottom. So this book has just come out on Wednesday, so we missed that. Ngāpuhi Speaks, and you'd be really interested in that, and it talks about two major documents, the Declaration of Independence in 1835, and on our way over here, Lei was telling us about Kamehameha and how he had treaties with about 40 different nations, and how this document in 1835 has been made invisible, hidden, so that people can't pull it out. And anyhow, it's over 172 years that Māori people have been in pain about having gone from being a, you know, the landowner to the you know, marginalised tenant, dispossessed, blah blah blah, all that stuff. Same old story as you guys. So movement is about moving communities, moving people's thinking. I found in the movement that sometimes movement may only last for 5 years. So you might mobilise around a particular action. But what I didn't hear last night, which I kind of missed Kikuni, and maybe I'm a bit ignorant, what I didn't hear last night was what was the common thread. I heard there's a million issues like us. We got so many issues to deal with that you can't keep up. It's almost like as you get older you think, oh, I think I'll only worry about 2 issues because I can't keep up with the 1,000 issues we've got to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But what is the common thread that we're moving for? I heard it tonight is Hawaiian independence. And even for us, that's the same as ours. It's Te Mana Motu Haki or Te Iwi Māori, Ngā Iwi Māori. Some of the things that cut us up is our own egos, our inability to get over ourselves. And so I think it's a human thing. It's about staying on the kaupapa, sticking to the issue, and I suppose at the middle of it, at the end of the day, who's with you? Like, wānanga, discuss how you want it to be. Like when we set up our school 20 years ago, we decided that we weren't going, we had put our children in punana reo, but we didn't want our kids to go to the next stage and then be embarrassed about having learned Māori at a preschool, and then they wouldn't, you know, they go into a mainstream school and be so embarrassed within 2 weeks they want to pretend they never went there. So we set up our own kura, and we were unfunded for 2 years. And then when they got to year 8, we said, well, why would I want to send them to a college and, you know, like negate everything they've learned for 8 years? So we set up our our secondary school. Again, we were unfunded for 2 years, but that was the will, and I think that's the issue. When you want something to happen, there's probably going to be no money. It's about having the will to do it, knowing what's achievable. So sometimes there's a big picture and there's small little goals to get along the way, and trying to remind ourselves, get over our own egos and coming together on common ground. That's what I've learned with battling with Māori and Pākehā, is that we've got to know what's the common ground. So there's some issues that are going to be grey areas, like maybe don't go there. It's not about avoiding it, but come together on the common ground. Hone, you heard about Andre and the big march. So we've had a lot of marches, we've had a whole lot of things. We've got a whole lot of iwi that are coming to tribes. We went from being very Maori, and then everyone went into tribal affiliations, and then they went into sub-tribe, which is hapu, and then we're going back to whānau. But I think the key thing is, and we interfight a lot. I think the key is don't get caught up in that, like koe te huarere. Who is the real enemy? What are we trying to fight? Is it each other? So at the moment I work part-time in my school, and the idea was that our school is 21 years next year, and we're going to be celebrating that, and we still have a struggle, because what we've realised is that when you've lost over, Te Reo Māori was discouraged for over 110 years, you've lost something like 5 to 6 generations of active language. You've lost that, and basically you've gone and impoverished your people already. It's like there's an intergenerational impoverishment and the lack of real. And there's a kōrero that was taken from a Jewish community when they went to rebuild their language, was that it takes 3 generations to build a language. So you need grandma, mum and dad, and mokopuna to speak the reo for it to survive. But it only takes 1 generation for it to lose it. So I have a school where we have 130 children, and they speak fluent Māori in the first 8 years, and then in their secondary years it's bilingual. And the hang-ups that our teenagers have about just learning Māori, there's a lot of... I worked it out that we have something like 600 kids in 8 schools in our north of Taitokerau learning Māori. 600 kids, sorry, I'll make that, no, it's 800 now. 800 kids, and there's a population of 100,000. And so the pressure for them to fit in with mainstream is really huge on teenagers. You know what it's like, with all the things that connect them. So anyhow, for us, fighting for Māori identity and being proud of it and maintaining the reo is probably one of the core things. If you don't have that, you've got e4. If you haven't got te reo, you haven't got much. And it's not to beat people over the head with it, but that's going to be the thing that helps to save us and heal us. Our language will heal us. Our language is our healer. And we actually have to re-promote language now and say, Māori language is an industry. It's not a hobby. Māori language is an industry. There are now jobs that only people who can get if they have Māori language. Anyhow, hoi nāno. I support Hone. I've been his campaign manager. Probably one of his best critics. Hopefully a good friend. And we're here. And we love coming here. I suppose it's like you have to get away, and we like to connect up and find out where everyone's at. So if you're part of the movement, political studies, I never ever studied that one. I remember being on one land occupation, Bastion Point. It was 506 days. And 30 years later, Bastion Point was just awarded back to the tribe the other day in Parliament. And I remember I left university at one stage because there was a land issue right on our back doorstep, something like 5 minutes away from the university. And I considered all the Māori students back at the time who wouldn't go there. and they'd say some bullshit story like, oh, you know, when I get my degree, I'll be able to really help my people. And I'm thinking, well, actually, they just need somebody up there to tautoko and to be seen, and like the more who go, because that was a living university. The land occupation was, and so I started to realise there's an academic exercise about discussing it, but it's actually about what you do with your hands and your actions that counts. So that's all I want to say. You know, study politics, understand it, but it's always about making things better, not being the brown version of the white oppressor. It's not about being the colouring in for the oppressors. Like when my friends finally won independence, they hadn't got independence in Tahiti. They won the elections several years ago, Oscar Te Maru, by 1 seat. By 1 seat. The thing they said then is that they inherited the infrastructure of the French. And so even though this could have been a great opportunity to put into place their plans for independence, they had this sort of like cumbersome infrastructure with all of these people who only knew how to do it the French way. And then I met another friend who got beaten up in jail, and he was the mayor of some outer island. No, not far, an outer island. And he said, you know, it's hard to talk sovereignty when all you have to worry about is dealing with the sewage. So, just something to think about. I know that people will get caught up. I've heard some stories about Hawaii, got a number of kings, so does Tahiti. And we've got a whole bunch of iwi over in Aotearoa that hopefully, you know, when the issues count, that we don't stay as tribes, that we get together and support each other. Independence, some people will get they'll do a big hate on each other. We think independence should be in the next 5 years. We think it should be in the next 10 years. We should think it should be in the next 30 years. Whatever. You know, there's all kinds of roads, but the longer you wait, 30 years, the further away it's going to look like independence. It's going to look more like, I don't know what it's going to look like. So, hoi nāno, good luck in your deliberation. I heard someone say they set up a Peace and Justice club. Whoa, Peace and Justice club at their school. Oh, well, kia ora. In my school, I think I really worry about that we've put everything on a plate for them. That we fought to give them the language, and that and we didn't want them to be as angry as we were. We didn't want them to be angry and pissed off and aggro like we were, you know, going through our movement times. But sometimes they got to get a little bit angry too, because if they don't get that angry, they got to meet the odd rednecks, the people who hate your culture. They got to be, what do you call it? They got to meet these rednecks sometimes. We think Maori language is separatist. We think that you are, you know, disturbing the fabric of New Zealand society. They've got to meet those rednecks so that they think, that'll be the day. Because they don't think of it. They don't, you know what I mean? So sometimes we can feed people too much, so you've got to keep them a little bit lean and hungry. So, hoi nāno aku, I better shush now. And hopefully Hone's got his view ideas together. Kia ora.
I think we can open it up for questions. And I'm sorry we didn't do the food thing first. We'll save that for maybe the last 15 minutes. We'll just kind of go easy. Mingle and, you know, talk story about everything we've heard. So, does anybody have anything that they want to ask? Yeah.
I don't know if you know about here, there's this like federal recognition with the Akaka bill and like the roll call, all kinds of stuff is like a really big deal. So my professor, Lily Pala, was talking about the Akaka bill, and it's very controversial, and she's like why she's for it and why she thinks we should have federal recognition, and she said, I think we should get federal recognition. We shouldn't she's like, we shouldn't try to model ourselves after the Native Americans. She said, I think we should try to model ourselves after the Maori. And you guys have controls over the fisheries, right? Like how the ocean is used, and that helps you. Yeah, it's funny, and she said that's a really good example of being in control of your resources. And I guess could you talk a little on that? What are your views on that? Do you think that could work here?
I think we need to share ideas a lot more. I like the notion that we are all children of the Pacific, and we should use that to bring ourselves together, and regardless of the American, the French, the British kind of history. And we should use those examples to bring ourselves together. The fish is a classic example. The Supreme Court, Privy Council, which is the highest court at the time, which was in London, basically said to the government, you do not own the fish. You need to talk to Maori about ownership of the fish. We actually failed there. What we should have done was, okay, we know it's going to cause a lot of trouble if Maori own all of the fish. All the Pākehā is going to cause all kinds of, there's howies, okay? All the Pākehā is going to cause a lot of trouble. So what we should have done was got into a partnership arrangement with the government over the way in which the whole fishery was managed. You know what I mean? What we did instead was accept a lot of the quota for the fish, which means you can trade the quota and you can make a lot of money, or you can go fishing. But by taking the quota and missing the management, we actually become part of the rape and pillage brigade. Instead of being the people to say, no more of that. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it sort of looks good from the outside, but the reality is we failed on it. It's an exercise we all need to learn from. That's what I think that Māoridom has learned from it. We are as involved in bad fishing practices as white folks are. And in terms of how the Māori fishing industry has developed, the area that I represent, I'm a member of Parliament, the area that I represent, there's now less Māori fishing than before that fishing deal was struck. So, yeah, there's ups and downs, but we can learn from one another as long as we continue to share.
I have a question actually about the way you're saying that people have to kind of back away from themselves. When you're organizing, how do you encourage people to do that without telling them, hey, you're too full of yourself, you need to back up? And how do you get them to kind of go past the pride and ego?
Yeah, it's endemic. I don't know. I suppose in your growing and your learning, you have to, and a woman thing. It happens to women as well.
Yeah.
I think you have to come to agree about what is the central focus. And, you know, like that thing I was talking about, common ground. And then you've got to sort of know the no-go zones. Don't go there, don't go there, you know, we'll work together on that. And that's ideally how it can be. And sometimes it works really well. And sometimes you've got to have translators, I say. You've got to have people who translate to others what the issue is. And I think what we like is collective kind of leadership. Is that like people have an ability to put all the ideas in, but somebody has to be able to pull it together. And so, you know, you get all that collective idea thinking and say, okay, you know, agree on this is what our plan is going to be. And just figure out what are the main things. And I know, because I think that's probably one of the biggest killers is egos, but I think in your learning as part of the movement, don't get besotted with people, that everybody's human, everybody makes mistakes, and everybody's got problems. And so you just have to understand that everybody's human. And give them feedback. You know, sometimes you need leadership, and leadership is not the same people all the time. But, you know, and the other thing is sometimes you've got to give leadership, and then sometimes you've got to take it. Like, oh, sorry, I don't mean it like that. I mean it like sometimes you have to lead, and then sometimes you just have to support the leaders. You know, if they're saying what you're saying, why do you have to be up front? You know, just total with them, support them. It's a hard thing because they're going to be the ones that take the knocks. About vanity, are they speaking well in the media? Are they representing your interest well? You know, they're the people that are going to take the knocks. And so, you know, in our movement, it's mainly the Hone, in the mana movement, it's mainly the old people. It's mainly the old people. We're just having a bit of a laugh when we heard that your group is called mana, because it's we've got a branch in Hawaii. But yeah, so it's a hard thing because we all get personally hurt when people say things and challenge us. But
it's also a Polynesian reality. I mean, that's serious. Certainly is in Maoridom. Nothing is led by committees within Maoridom. They're led by leaders. The trick is to make sure that the leaders are surrounded by people who are not fawning over the leader, be they woman, be they, it don't really matter, but that the people who are around them are as strong or stronger than the person who's doing the leading. Otherwise, the leaders start to think, man, I really am God. So it's about making sure that leaders never get that. But it's a historical reality within Maoridom, certainly, that all great movements back home have always been led by strong individuals. The Great Maori Land March was led by a woman by the name of Whina Kupa, and will always be remembered as she led the Maori Land March. Joe Hawke led the big occupation at Bastion Point. Sid Jackson, or Sid and Hana, pretty much, but Sid was personified as the leader of Ngā Tamatoa, the young warriors. So they are always really strong leaders, and they're the people that Maori certainly identify with strong leadership. But that ego stuff can get away on them unless they're willing to accept normally a small core group of people who will help to keep that balance.
And sometimes, you know, there's 1,000 battles. We don't even have the luxury of having one battle. We've got 1,000 battles we've got to fight. And sometimes we don't. We're so busy. We finish one, we jump into the next one or the next 10 at once. So sometimes we just got to go back and say, we won that one. Acknowledge the leadership, find out what worked, what could be done better. You know what I mean? We don't even have time to acknowledge what worked. So somebody needs to write about it, somebody needs to something, but you have to put those milestones in front of you and say, we achieved that. Like your kaholave or hana thing, you know, and stuff like that. You know, there were some wins.
I'm sort of a member of MANA, and like a discussion we always have is some of our members want to put the focus of the group into running candidates into like into like Hawaii state offices, and a bunch of us are really like, that's kind of distasteful to a bunch of us, because like how can we run candidates in a government that's, you know, occupying us and the cause of all these things. And I know you've been in, I don't know how you feel about it now, maybe you've talked about this already because I came in a few minutes after this event started, but how much have you been involved in the government there, and could that be applied to Hawaii, or like, is it like a special case in like New Zealand, Aotearoa, or?
The march that Andre and them were there for, that big hikoi, we took 50,000 people on to Parliament over the issue of foreshore and seabed. That action, I've been involved in actions most of my adult life, but that action was actually what propelled me into Parliament, into our legislature. But I've been constantly offside with both governments, of the left and the right, and even with my own party. And that's why I got out and started MANA. because the principles of activism are more important to me than the principles of the legislature. And activists are more important to me than politicians. So that's a position that's kept me constantly offside in the parliament, but I don't really care. Because I mean, what matters to me is honouring the people who are still prepared to do the hard work. In terms of being inside and outside, Hilla and I were just talking about it before. I can only be as strong inside as those on the outside are strong. Stronger, actually. If the movement people are stronger, they are constantly challenging me to be better and to be stronger. If the movement people on the outside get weak, then I start thinking, oh, I'm the man, I'm the man. You know what I mean? But in terms of sitting around talking about getting standing candidates and all that kind of carry, quite frankly, don't waste your time. I'm just saying, don't waste your time unless you've got the organisation that's going to win. Because otherwise, you can stand in every seat and you can dedicate your life to standing candidates anywhere at any time and never ever win anything. And then the person that wins, are they strong enough to accept the criticism of the crew? Like, is HauMANA a strong enough movement here so that if you stood for governor and you won, you'd actually listen? And is the movement here strong enough to recognise that if you would, they'd take you around the back and beat the shit out of you, regardless of whether you're the... Do you know what I mean? Yes. So the challenge is not so much about the candidate, it's the team. We had a brother who got into Parliament. He was going seriously off the rails. We had him fly up to see a couple of us. He was a minister, and his what do you call it? What do you call that car?
Oh, yeah.
The ministerial car was waiting for him at the airport, and the ministerial driver. And we dismissed him. Now he's coming with us. Took him in the car, and we drove off. And we got out to this place, and we went for a long walk along this wharf. And then he stopped all of a sudden, and he said, "You bastards are going to beat me up, aren't you?" I turned to the other brother, and I said, "I told you we should have just smashed him. We should have just smashed him." But now he knows he's going to run. But yeah, he recognised that although he thought he was a big shot, that there were still people in his world who were prepared to peg him back. And that's always important. I'm not necessarily saying go and bash people up, but I'm saying that those who lead need to recognise that the team and the people in the team are stronger than the individual. So stand candidates if you wish, but don't waste your time unless you're going to get serious.
You know, talking about that, when so made me think about, some of us got together,
yep,
and we were young activists, and the HauMANA movement, the movement of HauMANA that we started here, it's not really a movement. That's the problem. But what we did...
We'll sign you up tonight and you'll become a movement.
Yeah. I think that's the question I think that's the primary question that we were trying to explore. Because what we did was we kind of looked at other movements, political struggles, and saw that, well, one thing that I was inspired with was the Black Panthers. And the key thing that I saw was that during their time, when you had no matter where you were, you had a Black Panther from New York to Philadelphia, New Jersey, LA to Oakland, they were saying the same thing. They had the same politics. And I saw that the primary reason why that was the case was because they were operating off of a political platform that they had created. And so it kind of, to me, I saw it gave them a certain vehicle to empower themselves, because they could be decentralized as long as they were adhering to the principles of the platform. So that's how our MANA came to be. We got together and said, hey, we need to create a platform that outlines what we believe in, what we stand for, what we value. And so we did that. And I think it's a really good platform. I had helped, have input on it and stuff. But maybe from the creation of it, getting it out to people who are going to look at it. My idea was the platform is your recruitment tool, because people are going to look at that and either they're going to agree with it or not. But if they do, then they're going to want to get involved. But I think we've kind of struggled, with getting it out there. And again, internal ego struggles, was part of the problem and stuff. But now that, now as time has gone by, personally, I am revitalized, reinvigorated in terms of this platform is a good thing. A lot of work went into it now. How do we take it out, and get people to stand on it?
It's funny that, mana, the word mana, we needed to put the word mana out as a logo. And so I actually stole Hawaiian Warriors, design, the way they do their lettering. The font.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So when you see the word mana down home, everybody up here will recognise it. Folks down home don't recognise it. I know where it comes from. I stole it from the Hawaiian Warriors. You know what I mean? So it's really funny. Really funny to hear this sort of interaction. We learn. A lot of people say you Maori are doing really well. I was in Australia, up in Alice Springs, talking about Aboriginal people. They say you Maori people are doing real well. I said, stop talking like that. I said, we only do well if we all do well. So what we can share with you, great. What we can learn from you, great. Yeah.
Sort of a question as well. Going back to the parliament, I don't know exactly how parliaments work, right? Because that's not what we're used to. But when you talk about being committed to the principles of activism over the principles of the legislature, how do you remain effective as a representative in the legislature while being committed to the principles of activism? So in other words, my concept for legislative politics is you have to make wheels and deals to get your stuff moved, right? So how do you stick to those principles of activism and make change and be effective? Or how do you measure effectiveness?
Well, the reality is that you can negotiate and you can compromise in strategy, but you never ever compromise your principles. That's what's seen me get pushed to the edges in parliamentary life. But they just ran a poll. There's 21 Maori in Parliament and 120 members. They just ran a poll. Two of the ministers who are Maori, one got, I think, 18%, one got 16%, another Maori party leader got 8%, and I got 32%. So I believe it to be true that ordinary people get it. Our people get it. They know when somebody's saying something that's close to their hearts. And they can tell the difference between that kind of talk and the bullshit that you get from other politicians. So, my theory is stay with what you know, stay with where you came from, stay with the principles that brought you in. And like I came in on a wave of protest, so I stay true to that. In terms of what can be accomplished, I've currently got a bill in the House called Feed the Kids. It's just a simple bill where the government would be responsible for feeding every child in the 2 lowest levels of schooling, in the most poor areas. It just so happens to be such a good bill that a lot of the other parties support it, whether they like me or not. So I don't try to get too involved in all of that, because that's a waste of time. And I only talk about the things that I think are important to the people who matter.
Well, just on that Feed the Children bill, there's 4 million in our country, and they're saying that 250,000 of our kids are living in poverty, which is pretty shocking. And so this Feed the Kids bill's been getting a whole lot. It's so simple, it seems stupid. Doesn't sound like it's talking about sovereignty, but like, how can you have sovereignty if your kids are hungry and they're not getting it on, they can't even learn because they ain't got money to, they've got no food. So it's been an interesting thing, because now the other parties have picked it up and are running with it like it's theirs. And Hone is only one in amongst 120. I wouldn't trust any of them, because there's so many deals that are, they're talking about lobbying and stuff, but people know, the people who are working with the hungry families on the ground know that this is the bill they want to see go through. So, yeah, I don't know. Hone's not really caught up in trying to be a politician either. He's an activist in Parliament rather than a politician doing activism in Parliament. He's an activist in Parliament, and he doesn't make, and some of our greatest leaders, or one of our greatest leaders, I can't even remember his name, somebody was telling me the other day, was a trade unionist in Parliament. He never ever tried to be a politician. He was a straight trade unionist. And so I suppose it's that angle. Sometimes people think you've got to become like that.
So anyway, that's the mana logo. See? Just stole it off the Hawaiian Warriors. I like the shark's teeth. I like the way it stood out. Those are our colours. So boom.
How do you create and launch one?
Basically, I was due to get kicked out of the Maori party. So rather than go through all of that drama, I said, I'm out. I'm out. And I forced a by-election. I said, and I will stand against the Maori party and the Labour Party and the National Party in my electorate, in my region. I will stand against everybody and I will win. And I did. And I won. And I won as the leader of MANA. So see, sign you all up tonight. But you can see the connection.
I suppose the other issue on another level is, I suppose if there's issues that the Hawaiian independence movement wanting to support. I mean, the New Zealand government's only one small government in the Pacific. In the South Pacific Forum, I don't think Hawaii's involved in it now, But in the South Pacific Forum, they say the two mini superpowers are Australia and New Zealand, and they're really hated amongst some of the Pacific Island governments. But that's something to think about. Like, if you guys need help from Aotearoa one day, and you can utilise Hone to get to something. He's in office at the moment, and you just have to contact his office. Might be something very little, but who knows, one day.
Happy to help.
If you're coming through Aotearoa.
John.
I'm interested in education. I'm going to work towards becoming a Hawaiian charter school teacher. So you're in the education system there. What's that like, and what kind of, do you guys have charter schools? I know you definitely have language schools. I think our language schools are modeled on yours. So just what's the Maori cultural centric schools or the university programs, what's that like?
We have 74 kura kaupapa, and we have 3 Maori recognised universities, Wānanga, Aotearoa Raukawa and Aonui Arangi. And so if you wish, you can do your degrees right up to post to PhD in Awarenui Arangi. And they're seen as, the government just hit back on them recently because they were so successful. They were more successful than the regular universities, and they found that a lot of other cultures were going into them and taking their courses because all the Māori language courses were free. And so they actually penalised them and stripped the leader, who now lives in Canada. They kind of punished him for being over-successful. And then they've just done this thing about lowering the numbers, so they try and limit these wānanga Māori. But for me personally, like I'm nearly ready to get out of teaching. I've been there since a long time. But there's nothing better than teaching young people. I don't think there is anything better. Probably I taught other people's kids better than I did my own, but it's the trouble with teachers, eh? It's one issue you have to sort of balance up. But there's nothing better. And it's not about whitewashing, it's about presenting. There's no greater role model to Māori than other Māori teachers. So it must be the same with Hawaii and Kanaka. If I'm, I consider myself a bit of a success in that we tell me, but I can recall the two teachers that liberated me. They were two Pākehā. They liberated me to become, hopefully, a liberationist teacher. And that's what I say. Education can be a vehicle of oppression or liberation. It's up to the way the curriculum and the leaders are. So you can make it a tool of oppression or liberation. And I think that's what young Hawaiians or young Indigenous people need, is liberation stuff. That is good. For us, for me, the most simple thing was, it's good to be Māori, actually. And when you were talking about the Black Panthers, because that impacted on right throughout the Pacific, and all of the Pacific Islands, one of the things that was a big issue for us was the concept of beauty. And when Angela Davies came out in the Miss World, whatever it was, Miss America pageant with her Afro. We met her several years ago. She came to Aotearoa. She's horrified to know that that's how people remembered her. Because she's into this thing about stopping, the superpower prisons, the super prisons. But for us, a lot of Māori and Pacific Island women, it made us redefine beauty. That we were never going to fit this sort of blonde woman thing, 36, 24, 36. We were more likely to be 36, 36, 36. And all that kind of stuff, and redefining beauty. So, the Black Power thing, consciousness thing. And I think that other element that came out of it was, I think even with us, is that people used to think we were just nationalist. A Māori nationalist, but I think that a lot of our policies and our movement, the mana movement, we call ourselves now not a party, the mana movement is good for a whole lot of people. And Hone has become known, I don't want to talk about it like that, but like I'm his best fan, I probably am, but he says often that I'm here to fight for the poor and dispossessed, because people in Parliament actually don't give a shit. That they will target their voters and they will adopt their whole strategy to keep their voters. Like, I won't go into the details, but anyhow. But so, the things that will benefit Māori poor will also benefit Pākehā poor and Pacific Island poor. You know what I mean? It's about housing and food and basics. So if you're going to be a teacher, that'll be great. It'll be really great.
Be good.
It makes me think, some years ago, Skippy has been this simplistically brilliant guy, the ability to see right through the bullshit and get to the core of it. And I remember they used to talk about agendas, or we gotta support this bill or that bill. And Skippy would always go like that. What's that gonna do for, how to feed us?
Yeah.
sometimes I think it's important to really take a step back and look at those you know, fundamental, basic.
I loved his thing last night. I liked his up your nose, in your face stuff. And I think that's the issue, is that it's really good to have honest, provocative people around. You know, like, Hone could move with a whole lot of people now and say, oh, Hone, you're just so wonderful in Parliament, and I'm going to follow you, and I'm going to, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, you could get used to that. But Hone gets told off everywhere he goes around Aotearoa by old ladies. You guys call them the aunties. But he gets told off wherever he goes. You know, it's keeping it real. But I really liked Skippy's stuff. Especially his thing about when he gets to heaven, he won't be bowing to God because God's already given him a hard time in this life. I hope you guys got lots of eccentric people like that who keep you, you know, excited, and you've got your young musicians that I could feel their blood bubbling last night, like you could feel them saying, we're waiting for this leadership to happen, you know, I'm Hawaiian, I'm proud, I'm a warrior, and you know, so it's out there bubbling.
I think that's the problem, a lot of us are waiting for it to happen, and it's not going to happen without us stepping forward and, you know, making it happen.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's a courage thing. Like, I'm not the brightest guy in the world. I'm not even the bravest guy in the world. But I'm strong enough to know that certain things you stand up for. It doesn't matter what anybody says. I got myself arrested a few months ago. Wasn't really that much of a big deal. But it's the first time a member of Parliament has been arrested in New Zealand since 1951. So that's good. The other thing that's good is that every time I go to court, I intend to use the media's presence, and I'll be swarming all over the courthouse, to push the issue of homelessness in my country, which is what I got arrested over. So, and you know, that's another thing that kind of sets me apart from every other politician. None of them have got the balls to do it, eh? None of them. And none of them got the courage of their convictions that they would step outside the law in support of something they believed in. In fact, the charge they gave me was so low, I almost threw it back to the police. I almost said, come on, guys, you can do better than this. But yeah, so that thing about activism and political correctness, I choose activism. And when I go to Parliament, I have to wear a suit and a tie, otherwise I can't get it. But apart from that, I keep all my clothes in my office, and when the bells ring at 1:45, I put my suit on, I go into Parliament. As soon as I come out, I take them straight off and get changed again. It's just part of what people say, oh, you get all dressed up in a suit. I say, well, actually, if you go paddling, you don't wear a suit. When you go paddling, you wear shorts and a singlet. That's how you go paddling. That's life. Hey, when you choose to be involved in different endeavours, you dress accordingly. I don't worry about it. I just do what has to be done. Be great if you fellas had a politician like that up here. Might be in this room. Might not.
Mahalo for coming and sharing that. Appreciate that. Been involved with the movement for over 40 years now, and what is really I appreciate your saying, both of you, about leadership and what it takes for a movement to move. It takes leaders. It doesn't take a lot of information and things like that. And when you mentioned Kaho'olawe, you know, we're coming up on some anniversaries pretty soon, and Kaho'olawe was one of them. There's a film that's going to be made called First Landing, and that is about the first 9 people who landed on Kaho'olawe. And a lot of times people think that a movement is all organized and it gets started.
That's right.
All this stuff. And that was not the case at all.
Never is.
It's never been the case. I mean, it's usually people say, I'm going to go do this, and they go do that, and then they see where the chips fall, and then they start building from there. The same thing happened with Kaho'olawe. So these 9 people who kind of, in a very clumsy way, landed on Kaho'olawe, and they got chased around by the authorities and arrested, and that turned into the return of Kaho'olawe many years later. You know, and so the thing about movements is that you just have to have the guts to go and do it, and the convictions to stick by your principles and not fold when the going gets tough. Because I remember when they landed, everybody, including the Hawaiians, were looking at them and saying, "You're just a bunch of crazies, you know, troublemakers and that." Nobody was on their side, except for a few kupuna who had told them to go to the island and land on the island. And that's what happened. So from there, the whole movement built, and what you see as a sovereignty movement really came out of that kind of defiance and that kind of conviction that was practiced by a few people. And so, you know, Cooper, I remember that day in March was awesome. One old lady starts up from Cape Reinga.
Well, it was actually the movement that put her in front of them. It was Ngā Tamatoa. They organised the march, but they knew that no one would listen to them because they were activists.
Right.
So they went around and got this well-known queer and asked her to lead, and she said, "Oh, was it the only man?" And she went and asked a few, and they wouldn't. So she ended up saying okay. But it was actually, you know what I mean? But she's the one that's the icon. I remember when I went to Kaho'olawe, it was, we had the Nuclear Free Independence Pacific Steering Committee, something or other, and we went there, and I mean, I was really a townie. And so the first thing they did was they said, "Can you guys just get out and swim from here?" And I'm like, "What?" And so I remember myself and a nun, a Filipino nun, and you know, because the boat could only go so far, and like I didn't know how to swim, and nor did she. But she jumped out with her habit and with a bit of a ring around her. And I remember those blinking kiawe thistles. And we had that old Kaumata Mitchell, Henry Mitchell, was it? Harry. And he'd tell us all these lies, like he'd say, "Oh, these things on the ground with chocolate raisins from the akua." And goat shit, you know, but he'd just tell us all these stories, and one kahuna or something took us around the island and got us lost, and they had to send a search party out. But it was all fun. And from that, those international, you know, that's how we made those connections with your movement too, because then we went home and put pressure on the New Zealand military not to, you know, be involved with exercises. So the peace movement picked that up back then. But kia ora, yeah, it's how it starts. And usually, it's the people, it's your own people that condemn it right from the start, and somehow it flowers into something bigger.
Thing is, be clear about what it is that you're going to do and why. Surround yourself with like-minded individuals who are likely to be as strong. Chances are not, the whole group won't be as strong. So when it comes time to get arrested, some people won't, but don't go condemning one another over it. Some people are up for that sort of thing, some people aren't. But everybody plays a role. Everybody plays a role.
Somebody's got to bail you out.
That too. That too. Although when we used to get arrested in the old days, we used to just say to the court, "Throw us in jail." You had no right to come on to them when I throw us in jail. They'll throw us in jail. We create so much trouble in jail. A week later, they'll throw us out again. So, but I mean, there's all different ways that people can play a role, and people shouldn't always think that God, I have to be able to get arrested to be in, you don't. Okay? But you have to be able to contribute positively to where the movement's going and what the movement's doing.
I kind of have a different outtake as far as the whole lobby, because I think that it was Pono what happened and what occurred, but I think that the message and the reason got lost because the bombing is continuing and it's happening in other parts of our island chain. And it's not only, it's spread. So I think that message and that purpose in the beginning somehow got lost. They now have that island, but the message seems to have lost strength and money behind it. That's at least how I feel about it.
Yeah, but I think that the purpose of one of the purposes of the film is to carry or to remind people that, and then to carry out to stop the bombing on Oahu and other places. Yeah.
One of the things that HauMANA, so in Olelo Hawaii, HauMANA means student, so it just kind of worked that it was the Student Hui of Mana. But the Student Hui is working with some people in the community right now to begin to build a campaign, yeah. And it has to do with demilitarization and stuff like that. But one of the things I noticed in reading up about the hikoi of the 2004 one was you have 50,000 people that arrive at Parliament, and then the next day they pass the legislation, right? So I'm wondering if, I want to ask you guys to talk about objectives a little bit, and if when the hikoi was organized, was the only objective focused on the actual legislation, and do you anticipate maybe losing particular battles, and how do you overcome those battles to continue on in the war and keep people, going? Because I mean, you can anticipate lost battles when you're dealing with the United States military.
Yeah. Never make die on the land statements. Like, don't say, unless we get this, we are going to die. You know what I mean? Because if you don't get it, then you're dead. You know what I mean? So never make die on the land statements. That's number one. And in terms of the hikoi, we wanted to try to stop the legislation, right? The second part of it was to reject or to try and break the stranglehold that the Labour Party, Democrats over here, have always held over Maori people. You know what I mean? We've followed them blindly for years and years and years and years, generations. And that Labour could act this way against Maori. It wasn't just a rejection of the legislation, but a rejection of them and a challenge to ourselves to create something new. And so out of that action, it didn't just stop there. Flowered the new Maori Party, and we rode a wave of support to the party. We got from never ever having an independent Maori in Parliament. We got 4.
Yeah.
We got 4 first up, and then second time round we added 1, got 5. But then the Maori Party, and I was part of it too, did a deal with the national government, the Republicans, and it just then started going down. We became a puppy dog, and I was constantly challenging my party. We've got to break free. We can't be this. You know how people put us in to be a strong and independent voice, and not just somebody's puppy dog, but they were too caught up in it, so I left.
So the hikoi also served to sort of agitate this complacent relationship between Maori and the Labour Party.
Yeah. And by launching the new party, it gave focus to the ongoing nature of what was the biggest Māori protest the country had ever seen.
I think it also yeah, that amassing that amount of people, it's sort of like reminded, like I say, there's only 4 million in Aotearoa. When you got 50,000 on a march, no arrest, no bloodshed, nothing, it just reminds the powers that are, when you piss people off enough, that 50,000 can come together. And it hasn't been, even though they've passed that legislation and they're going to make it worse, there's a new bill coming up to make that bill, that evil bill worse. It's still not over. For Māori people have been fighting 172 years. It's not over. So I kind of hope one day, if we ever got the chance to change that back, because at the end of the day, Aotearoa's Māori land. People try and say, oh, here's your Māori land over here, it's 5%, but actually the whole country is. And so it's the foreshore and seabed, it's the waters, it's the everything. It's everything is Māori land. Yeah, so it's just a gentle reminder, and every time there's a big hikoi like that, the government changes. That's the power. You may lose the legislation, but the government soon changes. So it's a freaky thing. They can ignore you for a bit, but it's a freaky thing when you're going to mass that amount of people who are just pissed off and needed to do something. They needed to do something. They just didn't want to sit at home and complain about it. They wanted to do something. So what we had was people organising. So we started from the Cape, the far north. We had a whole bunch of old people turn up and did prayers at the start. And it's the place where we say that's where the Te Rerenga Wairua. So they did the prayers, and then we were just overwhelmed. Everywhere we went, more and more joined in, and then iwi organised. You'd walk into a tribal area and they could cater for 7,000 at a time. And then every time you move, and we'd say the rules every day. And the other thing I'd like to say that we got from a couple of old activists, American Indians who are really impacted on Hone, was just personally amongst ourselves, we made a commitment about no drugs and alcohol, because we kind of think that can cloud issues in movement politics. And the other one is, loyalty and not bloody cheating on people, the way you can undermine people is personally, not to sort of undermine your movement really is by being kind of put all like that.
He pātai kāku.
Kia ora. No he koe.
No kia ngā.
No tēnā koe. Mea tēhea whānau.
No te guests. He Alison no makeup.
Oh, it's here.
Yeah, engari koe nā taku. I tuaki reira. My question is, I guess, when you talk about movement, and I think for my generation, a lot of what we struggle with is scale. Like, where do we apply our energy? Because you get in, you go, oh, I want to go into politics, you end up working for the kōkiri or something, and then you're overwhelmed by, where it is you put your energy. But I think one of our bigger battles is our haukainga, our papakainga, places like Hungary, you wouldn't have someone like Kukupa, right? But those places are losing so much, so much of its way because people are leaving and they're going to urban centres, and it's easy to make a movement when you've got that energy in an urban centre. But how do you ignite movements within our rohe, within our papakainga? Because you're not only battling the energy or the wairua and the cultural stuff, but you've also got this intergenerational perceptual stuff. It's really hard leaving. Majority of my generation go away and then coming back. And with these new ideas and this energy and this real, fire in our bellies to strengthen our home. But you've got these people who are staying there, and haven't seen, haven't been reignited with that energy. So how do you change your
your approach and your tack, because going in with all guns blazing isn't going to work.
Oh no.
Yeah.
What I found when we went home, like, you got great people up there like Pa Tate. Father Tate is one of the most inspirational spiritual leaders in Māoridom. He's a Catholic priest. He's wonderful. And then you've got a leadership in there like Joe Cooper and
Charlie Dunn.
Charlie Dunn and Hine Puru. They're fabulous. And so you've got that kind of energy there. What we found when we moved home was we were sort of activists in the city, and then we found out that people made us dial a protest. So we went home. But people didn't listen to us for at least 2 years, because a lot of people go home and they got all these great ideas and they go, yeah, fabulous, fabulous, but they just want to know if you're going to hang around.
Yeah, yeah.
So I suppose there's that. What we're finding is a whole lot of people are moving to Australia.
Yeah.
And so our country is becoming empty because it's so pathetic in Aotearoa to get a job. So we've got something like 60,000 Māori living in Australia looking for jobs. But
trick is pick your battle. Once we got established at home, Hilda, I was working at a work trust which had a week before it was going to get shut down, and I built up from that to the biggest work trust in Northland. Hilda started a kohanga reo. That kohanga reo grew into our kura, which grew into our whare kura, and we added on to that our wānanga. I went to work from the trust to the local iwi authority, the tribe, and took it from a $30,000 a year entity to a multi-million-dollar a year entity. At the same time, I also started the radio station. We had one radio station, added another, added a fourth, and then a television station just before I moved into Parliament, and that's now running. So you pick the battles. You pick the battles that are appropriate. Pangaru, probably right now, and don't tell anybody I said this, but I suspect one battle there right now that the whole community needs to get in behind to win is to build the school back. If that means becoming a different kind of school so others are encouraged to come home to be at that school, whatever it takes. And there's a battle worth winning. It's a wonderful school. It's got great facilities, but good people.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not about trying to save. It's not about trying to save everything, because you can't save everything at once. But if you focus your energy on winning certain battles, once you win one, you'll be surprised. The community goes, "Wow, we thought they were all shit, but look what they've done." Hey.
Yeah.
So by our actions, we people up home started to realise we weren't just the ba-ba-ba-bas from Auckland, but we were the ba-ba-ba-bas who could actually create things as well.
So I heard you talking about feeding the kids, and I know that health issues are important to you as well. I was following along with your hikoi kaupapa. Can you talk about how that's going? Because I know I've lived here in Hawaii for 7 years, and all of us at the Pacific, our people are suffering, Polynesian people are suffering with diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease and that kind of thing. So I was really excited to see that somebody else was as anti-smoking as I am. What's happening with that?
When I started in Parliament in 2005, there's so many issues. I decided, what's the one issue I'm going to focus my attention on, and it was tobacco. So I made a bold announcement that New Zealand would be smoke-free by, I got it in 2005. I said, I want us to be smoke-free by 2010. And I went around everywhere and I was really pushing the message. People thought I was crazy, but I just kept pushing. Eventually, managed to get a select committee inquiry into tobacco, and we now have legislation in place so that I think we'll be the first Western nation completely smoke-free by 2025. And we have a range of initiatives in place to you know, grow smoke-free areas, and it's got its own momentum now. And when, like in 2005, everybody thought I was mad, even in politics. We'd have a select committee, we'd be up here and people would be out there, and people would come and talk to us about their stories, etc. Professional groups, ordinary people. One kaumātua turned up. I happened to be chairing the committee, and he was sitting down in the back, and I said, and these others were supposed to come, but I knew the TV was going to go at lunchtime, so I asked him to bring the old fella up. So the old fella came up and he put this box on the table. He was sitting over there, and he's speaking to us, and he said, so I had to have a heart transplant because tobacco had so affected my heart. It so destroyed my heart. And then he opened up the box and he goes, here's my heart. Whoa! We go, holy shit! And he went to put it back in the box, but I knew this was one of those moments, television moments, that, no, pass it around my select committee. But the camera's got the whole thing there. But I mean, again, that's the activist training. You don't get that sort of media that often. So when you get it, maximize it. So that's the other thing too. Yeah, we're going for plain packaging now. Ban on tobacco being displayed. We'll be moving on to things like no smoking in cars. We want to cut down on the nicotine content so people are less addicted and come off it easier. We want to get rid of all of the chemicals in it so that tobacco actually tastes like shit. Because there's a lot of chemicals in it, so you go, oh man, that's cool. I used to be a smoker. That's why the target isn't so much smokers. It's trying to break the connection with the industry. Break down the industry. And I'm hoping to get up to the US next year to meet the woman who launched that multi-state suit against the tobacco companies. Because I want to do the same thing down here. I want to sue the tobacco companies, make it not worth their while staying until 2025. They're fighting against it as hard as they possibly can in the international courts, etc., etc., etc. But I think since 2005 and everybody thinking I'm a nutter, the country is on a roll now. All of the journalists, all of the health people, all of the politicians, all on board saying, you know, tobacco, your time has come. Yeah, so that's happening. Actually, I'm supposed to be meeting somebody up here while I'm here, some lawyer who was involved in. Now that you mention it, thank you. I forgot about that. I'll try and catch her one tomorrow. But yes, go on. But again, it was just about more than anything. Like I didn't have the research. I just knew that this was something that had to be done. I actually surrounded myself with a lot of other Maori people involved in the anti-tobacco sector, so that we were constantly working together. They were constantly challenging me to be active and public about it. So that helped to keep me. So it goes back to that same thing. I was the public face of it. Now Tariana Turia, as the minister, is the public face of it, and she's very strong on it too. So that's great. I'm really pleased by that. Even though we've parted our ways, she's with the Māori Party, but that don't matter. She's now the public face, but the issue is on a roll, and we will win this. So, I mean, that's what it takes.
Just something about activism. I think one of the criticisms that came about with the Mana movement, or getting people into Parliament, we tried to get a few other members in, and we failed. And there's another election coming up in 2014, and the thing that Hone was talking about was that some thought, okay, we can put away our activism gloves now. We've been saved. The Mana movement or the Māori Party is going to do it all for us, but that's just so untrue. And so that thing that Hone was talking about, activism needs to continue, because what you get in Parliament is the sort of the middle of the road sort of acceptance. If it ever comes to pass, it'll be middle of the road. And if you don't have people out there agitating for more and harder and more things, well, you know, you get that false sense of security. Oh, Hone's the man, he'll save us. So we were lucky that we had, you know, we've got sort of some younger activists coming through, challenging things that, oh, I don't want to listen to Hone. He's a sellout. I've been called a sellout's wife too. I was like, wow, that's what we used to call people. We'd call them kupapa. So sometimes they'd be called a kupapa colonial wife of a bloody ass-licking whatever. And I think, oh, that's what we used to call people in the old days. So now they perceive us as such, but that's okay. So it's really important to, you know, it's not about being lobbying, but it's about people pushing on the outside. Yeah. Otherwise, because I know in Parliament that sometimes other MPs who've got lives totally removed from reality, they're middle class, they're totally removed from reality. Sometimes they'll defer to Hone to give an opinion, and because they don't have any contact with real people, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So there's got to be people outside, in their face, our face, and reminding us to be fighting for more, rather than settling for what you can get. I hope that makes sense.
And one of the things we learnt about that thing about candidates is that the next time round we're going to go with probably only 2 or 3, the ones that we're going to put all of our energy into winning. You know what I mean? Rather than trying to stand 20, 30, we'll just aim for the winnables. And put all our energy in, because I mean, I don't want to be back in it just by myself next time, eh? I want some buddies. Yeah.
Kind of in a similar vein from the earlier questions, but I was kind of wondering in terms of maybe strategies or key points when you're dealing with, for me, like the really frustrating thing, like working like within our own communities is that this, a lot of times, I guess it's apathy or complacency, or and especially when it comes to like valuing traditions. I mean, when you talk about like trying to save sacred places, or you talk about you know, applying Hawaiian values or applying American Indian values to issues of development, government, whatever it is, and I feel like a lot of times there's, I guess, just that it's just not there. Like they just don't have the fire, they don't have the will to fight. Or you know, in a lot of cases, it's, you know, they just internalize so much of the oppression that, you know, they get comfortable, or they just want, you know, that in their mind they're like, okay, well, I want to worry about, you know, making enough money to feed my family. I want to get a good job, get a house, whatever. So they, you know, look for that, and not so much for leaning toward the traditional side. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, I mean, what are the strategies, or what are the, you know, key experiences that you may have had that, you know, help you to deal with, like, you know, empowering them and getting them, you know, on board, and getting them to value those things and push for those things, as opposed to just kind of going with the flow.
Find 2 other people like you who believe in the same things, and also always hold the thing that will keep you pono is the values that are pono. So find 2 other people who think like you, like-minded people. It's too hard to do the whole group. And, you know, find an action that's appropriate and is going to be useful and perhaps winnable. And maybe look for the auntie or the uncle that is already well versed in that area, just to help you with, I don't know what you call it, tikana, the right way of doing things. So, you know, you don't have to have a big group. Just find like-minded people. Oh, we've found that works better. It's actually easier to work with 3 mates. 3 mates working on the same thing, rather than trying to bring 100 people who disagree on everything.
Especially students, who can often intellectualise something to death before it even gets started. So yeah, if you at least got a couple of mates of like mind, then then as people start to criticize you, say, kapai, you do what you've got to do, we're doing this. The other thing too is, you can't save the world, but you can identify certain things that you can change. And if you are good enough to change it by the strength of your convictions and the numbers that you can build around you to create that change, others will see, there's something to these kids. They've got something. I don't know what it is, but they said they were going to do it and they did it. I went to a kura, and for the last 10 years, they've had problems with traffic going past their school. They've spoken to the council, they've spoken to the transport department, So I said, okay, stop, come with me, show me where it is. They showed me where it is outside on the road. I said, right, here's what happens. It's the holidays next week. You write to all of the authorities now, and you say, by next Friday, you want an answer or you will take action. You're not going to get an answer. So here's what you do the following Monday. You get the boys in with the right kind of paint and you paint the pedestrian crossing on the road. And you force the authorities to deal with the action that you have taken. You know what I mean? So instead of, they were trying to change legislation, they were trying to change things at this level, and it was doing their heads in, and they were worried every single day about their kids. I said, stop thinking like that. If you're strong enough to do it, you know, and then one guy says, oh yeah, I'm in a road gang, we use that paint all the time. Another guy says, well, we can just go down the road and measure up the other one. I said, for the first few weeks, you're going to have people standing away, you know, about 100 feet away, you know, waving cars down so they know there's a pedestrian crossing. But sooner or later, everybody's going to get it. So, yeah, try to make things, certainly the early ones, simple. Like, your whole kaupapa might be sovereignty. And everybody goes, oh, God. But your first step might be something really, really simple. Whatever it is. Yeah. So that it also encourages yourself. You can say, shit, we've done that. We've done that. Like, we've got ourselves a car park out here. I don't know. Or whatever it is, say. Yeah.
What is your take on GMO?
So then we're going to have to wrap this up for a little bit, but can answer.
GMO is just like everything else. It's no big deal. It's just like everything else. Anything designed to kill you and your children and your grandchildren is there to be resisted, right? But if you want to fight GMO, then you know what I mean? It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. If you wanted to make an issue of it, you might want to go back to your valley and create a campaign to make your valley GMO-free. So making it small enough to be winnable. Once it's won in your valley, lift it across the hill to the next valley.
Mahalo nui. It's 7:15. We definitely want to, continue discussion, but we have some refreshments in the back, some food, and Kukini brought a big kanoa of ava. So we could maybe take a little bit of time to do that and keep on discussing amongst ourselves. So I think a little break is in order.
Yeah, and then I just to put a little pitch out there too. The HauMANA not sign up like membership, but email us to stay in contact with us and start getting involved and helping us make more initiatives, do other things and actions that we're planning is on the back table along with the MANA platform. So please do sign up. Stay in contact.